Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This week, I welcome back onto the show YFP team member Justin Woods. During the show, Justin shares takeaways from over 350 conversations that he has had with pharmacists looking to hire a financial planner. Some of my favorite moments from the show include hearing why pharmacists are skeptical when it comes to hiring a financial planner, the various terms and titles used in the financial services industry, why fiduciary and fee only matter, what outcomes to expect as a part of the financial planning process, and the various ways that financial planners get paid. Whether or not you decide to work with our team of certified financial planners at YFP Planning, our hope is this episode will give you the insights and information of what to look for when hiring a financial planner. If you are interested in joining more than the 280 households in 40 plus states that work with YFP Planning for one-on-one financial planning and wealth management, you can book a free discovery call at yfpplanning.com. Whether you're just getting started in the middle of your career or nearing retirement, our team is ready to help. Again, you can book a free discovery call at yfpplanning.com. All right, let's hear from today's sponsor, Pearls, and then we'll jump into my interview with YFP Director of Business Development, Justin Woods.
This is Justin Woods from the YFP team with a quick message before today's show. If you're tired of relying on shared passwords or spending hundreds of dollars for drug information, we've got great news for you. Today's podcast sponsor, Pearls, is changing the game for pharmacy professionals. Pearls offers top drug summaries, clinical teaching points, a drug interaction checker, calculators, and guideline reviews all in one user-friendly resource. They also recently added free weekly quizzes to test your pharmacotherapy knowledge. Whether you're on your web browser or accessing the mobile app, Pearls has got you covered. Visit pearls.com, that's PYRLS.com, to get access to more than 25 free pharmacotherapy charts to get you started. Upgrade your drug information resources today with Pearls. Don't miss out on this game-changing resource.
Justin, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Excited to have you in this discussion that we have today. Also an exciting time for you, Justin. Some of our listeners may know, many may not, that you and Sarah, you have twins on the way. Super exciting phase of life. How's the preparation coming? I don't know if you can be fully prepared, but how are you feeling?
Yeah, we feel, I guess, mentally prepared, right? As to pharmacists, we want to plan for everything. And so we're just anticipating the arrival. My wife is 33 weeks pregnant right now. So I guess on average, twins go to 38 weeks. So could be any time now, to be honest. So yeah, we put the car seats in the minivan this morning. And yeah, exciting stuff around. Yeah, a very expensive season of life with daycare and whatnot. But yeah, we are excited nonetheless.
You know, it's fun. I was reflecting back. You and I have talked about this, as Jess and I had our 4 boys, and, that adjustment from 1 to 2, and then you go 2 to 3. Everyone says, hey, you go from man to man to zone defense. You're going right there, right? 1 to 3.
Yeah,
so
we're going right there. We're going right there. So thankfully, our toddler, who's 2, a little bit over 2, already knows that there are 2 babies on the way. She's already been trying to be very helpful. So we're hoping to bring her into the defensive scheme a little bit as well.
I love that. Well, it's been a while since we had you on the podcast. On episode 250, we talked about 10 takeaways that you had from 50 financial conversations with pharmacist colleagues. We'll link to that episode in the show notes. And for today's episode, we're going to dig deeper into the now over 350 conversations that you've had with pharmacists and what you've learned and why we struggle evaluating professional financial advice, why we struggle perhaps in choosing and hiring and evaluating a financial planner. Our goal being, Justin, that we can pull back the curtain on some of the secrets about financial planners so that our listeners can feel confident in who they partner with, whether that's with us, we hope so, or whether that's with someone else. And certainly that's okay. We want them to be informed in that process. So Justin, to start this off, one of the key takeaways that you've had, again, and now over 350 conversations with pharmacists all across the country at all different phases of their career, which I too noticed early on in my experience building YFP, is that pharmacists are skeptical when it comes to hiring a financial planner. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Tell us more.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing, right? But when I talk to pharmacists and I surveyed them to understand how they feel about financial advisory services. They shared, we're just confused about what advisors do, skeptical if they can actually trust them, right? That trust piece is huge. Or some folks who've actually regretted their decision to work with a particular advisor. And oftentimes, when I tell people about the work our team does and the breadth and depth of the topics, the advice that we offer, they share, gosh, I didn't know financial planning covers all of that, right? And in my opinion, a major factor of that is that people often don't talk about money with family, with friends or colleagues. And from that standpoint, if they're not talking about money, they're probably not talking about their financial advisor either. So and most pharmacists I talk to have a difficult time really thinking about one person in their circle, right, who works with a financial advisor. In fact, in 2022, only 35% of Americans worked with a financial advisor. And a more interesting stat is that a study done by AARP found that 45% of people would rather visit the dentist than make an initial appointment to talk with a financial advisor. So, and nothing against a dentist, right? Because my mom was actually a dental hygienist for about 35 years, but people distrust financial services as an industry. They don't know how to choose or vet a good advisor, and they don't even know what an advisor does, right? So the other side too of folks who are in that pre-retirement phase, 74% of Americans have shared that they wish that they could get a financial planning do-over or set up a better financial situation. So there's really this gap between what people are afraid of, maybe because they don't know enough about it, and what they wish they had done in the first place too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the visit to the dentist is fascinating, right? I think of, that process. Obviously, I love dentists too, but not necessarily my favorite place to go. And so I'm curious to pull this back a little bit further, Justin, from all these conversations you've had with pharmacists. Why is this discomfort, this feeling, this, hey, I'd rather not do this at all or look at it? Do you have a sense that it's from maybe some that have had, a previous experience that left a bad taste? Is it influence of, maybe parents or family or friends or others? Is it, just this topic of personal finance, as you mentioned, is one that, especially if I'm maybe not exactly where I want to be, that I don't want necessarily someone, making that worse or me feeling judged by where I'm at with my financial position. What's the read you get on why the pharmacists you speak with maybe are, even though they've taken that step, obviously, to meet with you, or you wouldn't have had those conversations, still maybe not the most comfortable thing that they want to be doing?
Yeah, because there's a lot of confusion out there about what is a financial advisor. And when most people think of a financial advisor, they think of just the investment piece. And realistically, that is only one piece. If you think about the term financial advisor, technically it's just a generic term with no precise industry definition. So this title can describe many different types of financial professionals like stockbrokers, life insurance agents, tax preparers, investment managers, and financial planners. There are some estate planners and bankers who also may fall under this category as well. The only distinction is that this person has to provide guidance and advice. If they just press a button and place trades for clients or simply prepare your tax return without providing that advice piece, they would technically not be a financial advisor. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are more financial advisors than pharmacists. In fact, the job outlook for financial advisors has a growth of 15% compared to 2% for pharmacists. And these numbers alone show that the demand for people seeking professional advice about their situation and the number of options a pharmacist has when it comes to actually hiring a financial advisor. So that process of vetting an advisor and finding out where that best fit is, that can feel overwhelming at the same time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the numerous titles that can be used. One of the things I often share with folks is, the term financial advisor or financial planner or wealth manager, whatever term you may see, in and of itself isn't really going to tell you a whole lot about what this person does. We'll talk about fees and how they charge and scope of services and all that. Really, the ownership is on the consumer to understand, what does that mean? And are they qualified? And are we a good fit? We'll talk about fiduciary and some of those responsibilities as well. And I think because of that variety and because of that confusion, Justin, I suspect that may be playing into not only the low percentages of folks that are engaging with advisor, but also that feeling of like, I'd rather just not, engage. I do still think there's a piece of, hey, maybe I had a bad previous experience that validated some of the concerns that I had, or maybe I have a family member, a parent, a relative, someone that's saying like, hey, don't work with an advisor because they had that experience that maybe was less than ideal, themselves. Or as we talked about just a little while ago, I do think for some, especially if they're in a position where they think, hey, maybe I should be progressing further than I have thus far, that, engaging with someone that is going to, reinforce some of the opportunities of where things could be a little bit better could add on to some of those negative feelings and feelings of self-judgment that people may have as well. So lots to consider and unpack there. And this reminds me, Justin, when Tim Church and I wrote the book Seven Figure Pharmacist, we sat down to write this chapter, and I kid you not, chapter on evaluating a financial planner, understanding a financial planner. By far, it was the chapter that took us the longest to write and had the most edits and revisions. And it's because of everything that we're talking about. There's not a simple understanding of what these terms mean. I think more than anything, there's some good questions that people can be asking to try to figure out more about what are the credentials, what does the scope of service look like, what does the fee, is this a good fit for me? But, we're used to the model of we know what a PharmD means, right? There are variances in educational programs, but there's a set of accreditation standards for good reasons when it comes to, the public understanding what is a pharmacist, what does a registered pharmacist mean, what does a PharmD mean. There's some level of consistency, right? Same thing with a PGY1, accredited PGY2, board certification. And I think my experience, and I suspect for many of our listeners, we adopt that mindset and we try to apply it to the financial services industry. And it doesn't work because there's so many differences and nuances in this industry. And if we don't do the homework in understanding a lot of what we're talking about here today, I think that further validates that feeling of like, this is confusing. I have this skeptical feeling. Maybe this is a little bit, not ideal for what I'm looking for. Or, hey, I don't mind paying a fee is something I hear often, but I just want to make sure that it's transparent. And I know that, this is a good investment that I'm making. So really good breakdown, Justin, of the titles and some of the concerns that are out there in the confusion of it. What about the concept, Justin, of fiduciary? This is a common question that I get. I think we've made some inroads into this term becoming something that people are looking more for, but there's still a lot of confusion of like, what is a fiduciary? Why does this matter? And why isn't everyone a fiduciary? It just seems like common sense.
Yeah, definitely. And it is just a fancy term, right? But it basically means that it's a person that you can trust with your life savings that is ethically bound to act in your best interest. So oftentimes I compare it to taking the oath of a pharmacist that a lot of us did, right? But if you partner with an investment broker, technically they only follow a suitability standard. So they believe that a recommendation of a transaction involving a stock or bond, right, it's based on what the customer may disclose in connection with that recommendation. So they're only looking at a piece of that person's life or what that person has told them. So in most cases, those who follow suitability, they're not required to collect as much information and data about you before they tell you what to invest your money in. It's kind of like a pharmacist only reviewing half of a patient's medication list before making a recommendation, right? I actually met with a pharmacist last week who said that she asked her financial advisor if he was fiduciary, and he replied with, I always do what's best for you. And that may be true, right? There are a lot of good financial advisors out there, but being fiduciary, right, taking that oath demonstrates a level of commitment and transparency that the advisor is held to that standard at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good call, Justin, right? Just because someone is not a fiduciary or something we're biased toward, obviously not a fee only advisor, meaning that, in a fee only model, you are compensating the advisor for the advice that they are giving you. They're not getting paid by recommendations of insurance products or investment where they're essentially getting a kickback. So we use these terms fee only and fiduciary, but just because someone is not fee only or fiduciary doesn't mean that they're incompetent, doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It really means that, hey, we got to do a little bit more homework to line up. Well, why aren't they a fiduciary? Why aren't they fee only? And what implications may that have to me and my financial plan? And is that the best option or not in terms of engaging or working with someone in that area? So I think really important concept. John Oliver, Justin, has a great segment.
He
I'll link to it in
does.
the
Yeah,
show
I've watched
notes.
that a few times. It's funny.
Great segment on fiduciary and suitability if you want to learn more about this. The example I always give, just when I present on this topic, is that if I'm going to buy a suit, right, and I go to two different suit shops, one is providing suits under a suitability standard. If we play this out, one is under a fiduciary standard. I like a nice slim fit suit, right, that's appropriate for the width of my shoulders, my arms, my leg, overall physique. And so if I go to the fiduciary shop and I say, hey, these are my measurements, they're going to do the work and they're going to get me a nice fitting suit that is the best. It's the best fit for me in my personal situation. That's the comparison to the fiduciary standard of your financial plan. If I go to the suitability standard suit shop, maybe they don't take the right measurements or they don't have to do all of that analysis. Maybe I leave with a little bit of a baggy suit, right? Too long, doesn't get tailored. It's not terrible. Maybe it is on some level. You can argue it's appropriate, but it's not necessarily the best fit, right? Or the best option for me. And that comes to play exactly in the financial plan, whether you're working on, retirement planning or other parts of the financial plan. We really want to make sure that as you are evaluating all parts of the plan, that fiduciary is really looking at what is the best option for you and your personal situation. So fun example. And I think, to draw this to pharmacy, like, could you imagine walking into some pharmacies, Justin, where the pharmacist was, obligated to do all of these things, whereas in some cases, the other, that they only have to do half of the DUR? Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? As we think about it through our lens.
Exactly. And Tim, to tie off of your analogy a little bit, imagine if you were to go into that fiduciary suit shop, and that suit shop only worked with pharmacists or people of your body type and height. And I think that gets to what the financial planning industry has molded into, is this focus on niche or niche. We can debate that term too. But the financial advice industry for a long time was predominantly transaction based, where the advisors earned a living solely from those commissions that they earned on whatever product that they sold. So there was really no need to meet with those clients until there was an opportunity to implement a product, say like life insurance, for example. So it was essentially for advisors to be as broad in their messaging and marketing as possible, right? Cast a really large net to reach anyone with a pulse who might buy that product. But then in the last decade, we've really seen a movement to provide tailored advice. And it's really caught on, where you develop a unique expertise for working with those clients and the problems that they face. And that in turn leads to the development of services and scope and a business model that really fits a client for their needs. So for example, obviously I'm biased because I'm a pharmacist, but if I was asked to recommend a treatment regimen for like osteomyelitis in an adult, right? I could spend hours researching the topic and hopefully feel confident in my decision, or I could just call a friend who was a PGY2 trained infectious disease pharmacist who has that experience, has that knowledge to help me feel confident in the solution for that patient specifically. So that's kind of where I feel the benefit or the optimization of that niche comes in. Obviously, that perspective is biased too, since our financial planning team, we primarily work with pharmacists like us.
Yeah, it's a really important point though, Justin. Someone recently was kind of challenging this concept on LinkedIn a few weeks ago. And I really started to think more deeply about it. Obviously, it's, the bread and butter of what we do. And the more I think about it, the more I even firmly believe in the value of the niche. And this individual is really, kind of arguing against, like, why is there a need to really differentiate, financial planning services for healthcare professionals, or more specifically in what we do with pharmacists? And we see very specific examples of this on a weekly basis. There is value in repetition. We have a planning team of 5 CFPs that work with, over 280 households all across the country. And, some of the things that come up over and over again, like, hey, I'm working on a student loan forgiveness plan and I'm working with a nonprofit hospital. Oh, by the way, we've had, 15, 20, 30 other people that are navigating this. Maybe not that same employer, although we do have some of that overlap with institutions like the VA, for example. But like we've been down this path. We've, crossed these T's, dotted the I's. We've seen where the bumps are along the road, or even just more generally in some of the trends that we see of pharmacists in terms of income and barriers and challenges and, where they're at certain points of net worth throughout their career. I mean, all of these things compound over time with some of the experience. And I do think that there's a lot of value that can come from the niche.
Yeah.
Variety also comes, Justin, in the types of services that are offered. This is one that I think gets overlooked so often. You have these conversations way more than I, but it feels like there's this general assumption that like, hey, I'm looking at 3 financial planners and not necessarily asking the questions to understand what does that relationship actually look like? Who are the clients that they work with? Are they like me? Do they have experience in these areas? So I'm really referring here to the financial planning process and what a client can or cannot expect in terms of scope of service. And there are wide variances here. Tell us more.
Yeah. Now, I first want to start with an example that I had last week. I got on a call with a pharmacist from Ohio, and right out of the gate, she kind of asked us about our fees. And I was very transparent that if you're only evaluating based on fees or costs, it's going to be a race to the bottom because our financial planning model is not the quote unquote cheapest out there, but you really have to advocate for yourself and understand, okay, does the scope of the service, does the process that this team or this person offer, does that fit me exactly? And pharmacists want that structure, and the financial planning process provides that too. So it really starts with collecting all of your data and talking with clients to understand your financial situation. So through that conversation with a planner, they can map out both the short and long-term personal and financial goals. So if you look at my financial plan, certainly has all the big things like retirement and paying off our student loans that are still there, but it's got other things too, like going to Disney every year, right? My wife and I want to do a trip to Africa for our 10-year anniversary. It's got our beach home in there. So it's really establishing, okay, a roadmap of where all your goals fit in. And then how do we use your income or money as a tool to reach those outcomes at the same time? So it's just a kind of a traditional SOAP note where the CFP professional, right, your financial planner will look at the subjective, the objective, and then they'll develop that assessment and plan to maximize the potential or the probability that you will reach those goals and achieve those outcomes. So they often support you putting the plan into motion and then monitoring some financial lab values, so to speak, to really understand that progress and making financial decisions that can be broken down into the interplay about 4 factors that often aren't talked about. So there's the financial analysis, there's the money scripts, there's the emotions, and there's the overall well-being too. And unfortunately, financial analysis has been viewed for too long as the overriding predominant factor in making a good decision. But if we boil every decision down to a cost-benefit analysis without giving it the proper consideration to the other factors, then we're doing a disservice to our clients too. So without understanding the money scripts, we can't really understand the client's beliefs and values in financial decision making. For an example of that is, some of our clients have student loans, and so oftentimes that may come up in a conversation. I had one pharmacist couple who shared that their partner had been in a life-threatening accident. So that really changed their perspective on what they found meaning on in life. And they really didn't care about the student loans. They didn't care about the math around interest. They just wanted to pay the minimum amount and live their life now too. So it's all about working with somebody who understands what that process is and can really help you balance those personal and financial goals at the same time.
Yeah. And Justin, the more I experience, for Jess and I, our family and our financial plan, I feel like with each passing year, there's a greater and greater appreciation for less about the math, more about the emotions, more about the goals, more about the behavior. And I think part of this might be some overconfidence. I even had that, I would say, early in my career of like, I'm good with math. I can punch a bunch of numbers, but executing on the financial plan, versus just developing one or two very, very different things. And I think this is such an important part as you're evaluating different services. I think that Many pharmacists, myself included, we're analytical human beings. We see service, we see price, we compare. Those often are not apples to apples, as you're looking because of what we've been talking about here throughout the episode. So you really have to pull back the onion of, what is the scope of service? What is the fees that are being, what are they going to cover? What are they not going to cover? Do they typically work with individuals that are working through the challenges that I have in my financial plan? If I have $200,000 student loan debt, most firms may not work with individuals that are earlier on their career. Do they even know, some of the nuances on student loan, repayment? And so I think there's an appreciation that's happening that, to your point, much of the history around the planning relationship is focused on the math, on the analytical side. I think because of the evolution of fintech, we're seeing some of that become more of a commodity. And I think that's going to lead to more of a value of the relationship and really looking holistically at the plan. And the things that you mentioned are what ultimately we hear from people about success in living a rich life, right? The trip to Africa, the beach home, the going to Disney every year. Like if you and Sarah wake up and because you had a really good analytical math person doing the planning and you have $3.5 million saved, but you haven't lived a rich life, like who cares, right?
Right.
And so I think that as individuals are looking at option A versus B versus C, what's the scope? What's the price? What are the expectations? Do they have my best interest in mind? How often are we going to be meeting? These are the types of things, that we want to be evaluating.
Yeah, yeah. I think pharmacists, myself include the way that we are trained, the way that we think. We often get focused in on the mechanism of action or the process and ensuring that the process itself will help us achieve those outcomes. But if you think about it from our profession, so the general public oftentimes does not have an understanding of how the drugs that they take work, nor do many of them care, right? But they have confidence in their doctor and their pharmacist who give them advice, education, recommendations as well. I feel like it's the same thing when you consider financial advice, right? You want a particular outcome, right? But you may not be as concerned with how it's done as long as you get there. And there's a lot of complicated financial jargon out there that oftentimes can scare people away or make them feel stupid too. I was speaking with two pharmacists last week from Kansas, and they shared how they're trying to balance their personal and professional life. They acknowledge that they are not confident about their financial literacy or what they know. So they were really looking for somebody who could educate them, help them understand their financial situation to feel more in charge, take control, and just give them peace of mind of where they might end up. I felt like the husband provided a really good analogy there. He went on to share that as a pharmacist, he doesn't jump into a conversation with a patient about the pharmacokinetics of Venco, right? But I feel that many traditional financial advisors do that exact thing of where they show you some fancy charts and graphs to make it just feel confusing to justify their value over time. But if you currently work with an advisor, right, are you comfortable telling them you don't understand something and asking questions? Because I've heard this exact scenario from my sister, in fact, to where she doesn't feel comfortable saying she doesn't know something with her advisor. So as you said, it's a lot about that relationship piece.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example. That couple you mentioned, just last week, I heard things like peace of mind. I heard, making sure that we have our goals defined. I heard comfortable in terms of financial knowledge and literacy, which is interesting because I think those are some of the greatest outcomes that come from the relationship, but they also aren't necessarily the ones that we look at and say, hey, we can punch those in a calculator and determine the ROI, right?
Yeah.
So this is where I think you feel as a buyer, as someone is evaluating financial planners, a common question, Justin, I'm sure you get is like, what's the ROI, right? I'm going to invest X and what am I going to get? And I actually think the better we're doing on the planning relationship, you talk about living the rich life with the Africa trips, the Disney trips, what you guys are doing as families experiences, like putting a dollar amount to the joy in living a rich life. We know what that feels like. But to answer the ROI question, that's not an easy one, and perhaps maybe not even a good fit if that's the focus.
Right. Exactly. I actually spoke with a pharmacist recently who shared that his expectation of working with a financial planner was that our team would return $100 for every dollar that he paid to work with us. And I try to think about that if a patient had come to a pharmacist like that. So imagine if a patient had said, I expect this medication, right, to reduce my A1C by 5 percentage points, right? In reality, there's so many other factors like compliance, adherence, diet, exercise, access, affordability too, that would be impossible to quantify the exact ROI there too. So what if the pharmacist asked, okay, if we lower your A1C by 5 percentage points, what would that actually do for you, right? I think for most patients, it would help them, one, feel a lot better, right? Less fatigue so that they can keep up with their grandkids at the playground, maybe more time, right? Maybe you avoid some microvascular complications that don't derail your ability to drive across the country in RV, right? Or maybe prevent a major heart event that allows you to live longer too. So I feel like pharmacists work so hard for this 6-figure income and view it as the ultimate security in life. And what I see from pharmacists that I talk to is that the income alone doesn't give you the freedom, flexibility, or time that a lot of people are looking for.
And you can see this. You, again, do a lot more, of these discovery calls, talking with colleagues across the country that are looking for hiring a financial planner. So you see this more than I, but I recall many of these conversations where you can, in real time, see and feel kind of this split brain feeling of like, emotionally, these are the things that are most important to me, right? The peace of mind, the security, making sure I've got a good plan, perhaps on the same page with a spouse or partner. And we know that those are very difficult to quantify, but then our buyer mode goes on. It's like, okay, if I'm going to spend X, like what's the return and why? And so I think this is a hard thing to reconcile, but is an important one for obviously someone to feel good about moving forward. And I think for the expectations from a planning relationship, we always say that, Justin, if someone's going to move forward with us, we don't want them coming on board and having buyer's remorse. That's not a good fit for them. It's not a good fit for us. So the discovery process, the evaluation, when done well, and I think this is good advice, whether someone's looking to work for us or with someone else, is that you want to feel good about that relationship on both sides. And so if someone is expecting 101 ROI and, we kind of navigate that and we move it forward, like, guess what? In 2 or 3 months, like, we're probably going to realize this isn't a good fit. And so I think, establishing that upfront is really valuable. Fees, Justin, let's save the best for last, right? So much variety here when it comes to fees and what someone is paying. Often we'll hear from folks that, hey, I'm not paying anything. And we're like, well, not so fast. So sometimes this is transparent. Sometimes it's not. So what have you learned in terms of the various fee models that are out there and the expectations that clients have for how they're compensating a planner for their advice?
Yeah. And this is the one question that not many people can answer, right? How do advisors get paid? And I say that from experience because my first 4 to 5 years of working with an advisor, I had very little understanding of the fee structure, how much I paid. And from, 350 conversations with pharmacists, they have a very similar perspective as well. I believe it speaks to the industry as a whole, right? They're not very transparent about fees, which can certainly add to that feeling of distrust and being skeptical too. So if you're listening to this podcast and you currently work with an advisor and don't feel you pay anything, right, that should be a red flag. To ask more questions and be an advocate for yourself to make sure it is a worthwhile investment. And if you are working with a financial advisor, there is no such thing as free advice. So financial advisors typically fall into one of 3 different payment models, right? There's commission and a fee model. Typically it's called fee-based, and then finally fee only. So both commissioned and fee-based, right? They receive compensation based on specific financial products that they sell you. It could be insurance products, annuities, investment options too, like mutual funds. Fee only though, those financial planners are compensated directly by their clients for advice, plan implementation, and that ongoing management of all the assets. But I feel like oftentimes people just stop there, but that's not all. Because if you're not informed and educated, there are other fees that you may not consider. And I learned this the hard way. So in a commission-based model, there are fees tied to the sale and ongoing management of a product too. So it could be life insurance or disability insurance too. There are things like transaction fees, periodic charges, annual operating expenses. When you look at things like mutual funds, there are often sales charges, also known as sales loads. Those are commissions you pay when you invest in a mutual fund. So there are also expense ratios too. So when a lot of folks come to me and say, hey, I'm paying X amount for my advisor, oftentimes those do not include those additional expenses like the sales loads, the expense ratios as well. An example that I had, it is a pharmacist who was working with an advisor, asked that advisor, what are your fees, or how can I understand this a little bit better? And that advisor replied with emailing them a 46-page document talking
I've
about
seen those. I've seen
fees.
those.
Exactly. And I feel like, saying a document like that is just kind of praying and hoping that your client won't read that, because I often wonder if the advisor themselves can even explain what their fees are.
Yeah. We talked about this, Justin, Tim and I, on episode 208 of the podcast. We broke down some of the fees on investments, why that's so important. You talked about a handful of them. I think the transparency piece here is so important, not only for understanding, but also, again, what I shared just a few moments ago, you want to feel good about this relationship. And, we're not shy about charging fees. We feel like our planning team, provides a ton of value, and the return on investment is much more than the fees that are paid by the client. And we're proud that those are transparent. And if we get to that point through transparency and we determine, hey, it's not a good fit because of X, Y, or Z, so be it, right? But the transparency is there. And again, whether we're the solution or someone's looking at hiring another advisor, I think feeling good about that decision, feeling good that you know and understand the fees. And I think the separation piece is a really important one. So, if you're in a planning relationship where we hear this all the time, hey, I'm not paying anything for financial planning, it's free financial planning, but I just bought a whole life insurance that had a commission associated with it, right? So there's a natural inherent bias in the advice that is being given. Doesn't mean, again, that they're a bad person, doesn't mean that they're incompetent, but where does the incentive lie for them to be spending your time? Not on comprehensive financial planning, not on your student loans, not about setting your life goals and making sure we're on track with living a rich life both today and tomorrow. It's about spending time where the dollars are going to be earned. And in that model, it's selling a product. And that's one of the things I love about the fee only model is that you're paying the planner for the advice that they're giving. And sometimes that means you're working on traditional things like investments and retirement planning. Sometimes that means you're getting in the weeds on student plans or budgeting or buying a home or buying an investment property or working through a difficult conversation with a spouse and getting on the same page, talking to mom and dad about, finances, teaching your kids about, all of these things are important parts of the financial plan, but they're not traditionally incentivized where an advisor is going to spend time on those things if they're going to be compensated through recommending a certain product.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great stuff, Justin. Hard to believe it's been over 350 conversations. That's pretty wild, right? When you think back to that.
I had to look at that number before we jumped on, but 353 as of today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So for those that are listening, if you want to learn more about the comprehensive financial planning and wealth management services that we offer through the amazing team at YFP Planning, our 5 CFPs and the folks that support them as well, you can book a free discovery call with Justin. We'll link to that in the show notes, which is the direct link to his calendar. You also can go to yfpplanning.com and get to that as well. Again, that discovery call process, that conversation is all about understanding what are the goals, what are the things that you're facing in your financial situation right now. More than anything, Justin's going to be asking good questions, listening, sharing more about the services, trying to identify, is it a good fit with what we offer or is it not? So it truly is meant to be discovery in nature. There's no obligation through that process. And again, yfpplanning.com, or you can book directly to Justin's calendar. We'll link to that in the show notes.
And Tim, I would just add one more thing there if there's time, is that, through our conversation here, we've really only scratched the surface on a couple of these topics. So if somebody's still feeling pretty skeptical, right, confused about this, I do have an on-demand webinar that I recorded with all of my learnings from these conversations, my own experience too, that goes into a lot more depth about the various topics like scope and fees and whatnot. And I feel like for a lot of folks, I think there's been 60 people who have watched that so far. It really helps them understand and feel empowered about evaluating financial advice if it works for them or not. So it's typically a really good first step if you're still a little bit uncomfortable.
Awesome. We will link to that webinar in the show notes so folks can access that as well. Justin, thanks so much.
Thanks, Tim. Hey, this is Justin again from the YFP team. Thanks for tuning in to today's podcast. If you're a pharmacy professional, you know how crucial it is to have access to reliable drug information. That's why we're excited to tell you about Pearls, today's podcast sponsor. Gone are the days spending hundreds of dollars for access to drug information. Pearls offers top drug summaries, clinical teaching points, a drug interaction checker, calculators, and guideline reviews, all in a user-friendly resource. Whether you prefer accessing information through your web browser, Chrome extension, or mobile app, Pearls has got you covered. Plus, for a limited time, you can visit pearls.com to get access to more than 25 free pharmacotherapy charts to get you started. Upgrade your drug information resource today with Pearls. Visit pearls.com. That's PYRLS.com to learn more. Thanks again for listening.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted, and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.